These videos are based on real events, experiences, and accounts. However, all names, locations, and identifying details have been deliberately changed to protect the privacy and safety of those involved. Viewer discretion is advised. This happened about a year ago, when I was 23 and running on fumes in just about every part of my life. Work had drained me to the point where I felt disconnected from everything, like I was just going through the motions without actually being present. I won't get into all the details, but I had made some questionable decisions in the past, and at that point, I was trying to distance myself from the kind of life that kept pulling me back in. I needed space. Not a night out, not a weekend trip somewhere crowded. I needed somewhere quiet, somewhere I could disappear for a few days and not have to think about anything. One afternoon at work, I ended up venting to a coworker during a slow shift. I didn't expect much from the conversation, but he mentioned this small island off the coast of Maine. According to him, it was about as boring as a place could get. No nightlife, barely any tourists once the sun went down, and most people only visited for a few hours before heading back to the mainland. That sounded perfect. He told me that if I stayed overnight, it felt like you had the entire island to yourself. That idea stuck with me. Later that night, I looked it up and found a rental listing for a small cottage right by the shoreline. The price was cheap, suspiciously cheap. It was also available immediately. Looking back, those should have been warning signs, but at the time, I didn't care. I booked it without giving it a second thought. I took a ferry out the next afternoon. The ride itself was calm, almost peaceful. The further we got from the mainland, the quieter everything became. When the island finally came into view, it looked exactly like I imagined. Small, quiet, and completely unremarkable. The cottage was a short walk from the dock. It was even smaller than I expected. Just a single room with a bed, a tiny kitchenette that looked like it hadn't been used in years, and a cramped bathroom. The place was surrounded on 3 sides by thick brush that pressed right up against the walls. The front of the cottage faced the ocean, with a single window covered by a thin curtain that barely blocked anything. Inside, everything felt fragile. The walls were so thin I could hear the wind moving through the brush like it was right next to me. The door had a deadbolt and a chain lock that both looked recently installed, which felt out of place for such an isolated spot. Still, I ignored it. I spent the early evening walking around the island. It was strange watching it empty out. One by one, people got back on the ferry and left. By the time the sun went down, the place was almost completely deserted. No streetlights, no distant traffic, nothing. Just the sound of the ocean. I grabbed dinner at a small pub near the dock. The bartender was friendly, but when I mentioned where I was staying, she hesitated for a second. It was subtle, but I noticed it, like she wanted to say something but decided not to. On the walk back, I passed a small dock tucked into a rocky inlet not far from the cottage. There was a single small motorboat tied there. It stood out because every other boat I had seen was larger, clearly used for fishing. This one looked different, out of place. I made a mental note of it and kept walking. I got back to the cottage around 10:30, locked both deadbolts and the chain lock, and tried to relax. For a while, everything felt fine. Better than fine, actually. It was exactly the kind of quiet I had been craving. Then my phone stopped charging. At first, I thought it was the charger. Then I tried different outlets. Nothing worked. My battery was already low, and within an hour, it was completely dead. That didn't sit right with me, but I convinced myself it didn't matter. I had a physical ferry ticket for the next day. I didn't really need my phone. Still, I didn't like it. I decided to just go to sleep. I was exhausted anyway, the kind of tired where you fall asleep almost instantly. And I did. I don't know what woke me up. There wasn't a loud noise or anything obvious, but the second I opened my eyes, I knew something was wrong. Then I heard it. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate, crunching against the gravel just outside the cottage. They were close, too close. I stayed completely still, barely even breathing. Whoever was out there took another step, then another. There was a long pause between each one, like they were taking their time. I shifted slightly in bed. The footsteps stopped immediately. The silence that followed was worse than the sound. It stretched on long enough that I started to question myself. Maybe it was just an animal. Maybe I imagined it. Then the footsteps started again. This time there was no doubt. They were coming straight towards the door. Each step felt heavier, more intentional. I could track the exact moment they reached the entrance. And then they stopped, right outside. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure whoever was out there could hear it. I didn't move. I didn't make a sound. A few seconds passed. Then a beam of light flickered through the cracks around the door. Someone was shining a flashlight inside. I froze. The light moved slowly, like they were scanning the room, looking for something, looking for me. After a few seconds, the light clicked off. And then the door handle moved. Once. Twice. They were testing it. I squeezed my eyes shut, bracing myself for the sound of the door giving in, but it didn't. The deadbolt held. For a moment, I thought that would be enough. It wasn't. The handle rattled again, harder this time. Then came the first bang. It was so loud in that tiny space that I flinched. Then another, and another, each one harder than the last. Whoever was out there wasn't just checking anymore. They were trying to get in. The banging didn't stop. Each udar against the door echoed through the cottage like a gunshot, rattling the thin walls and sending vibrations through the floor beneath me. It wasn't random either. There was a rhythm to it, controlled, deliberate. Whoever was out there wasn't panicking. They were testing. I stayed frozen in bed for a few seconds longer, but something in my brain finally snapped me out of it. Lying there wasn't going to help. If that door gave in, I'd be completely exposed. So I moved. Slowly at first, then all at once. I slid out of bed and dropped low, keeping myself beneath the line of the window. My bare feet hit the cold floor, and I crouched near the side of the door, holding my breath tightly. It made my chest ache. Another loud bang. Then silence. It came so suddenly that it felt unnatural, like a switch had been flipped. I didn't move. I didn't even blink. Seconds stretched, maybe longer. Time felt completely warped, like I was stuck in a moment that refused to move forward. Then I heard it. A voice. Calm. Clear. Close enough that it felt like it was right on the other side of the wood. "I know you're in there, Ryan." My entire body locked up. For a second, I thought I had imagined it, my brain scrambling to make sense of the fear, but I knew what I heard. They said my name. Not a guess, not hesitation. They knew. A sharp rush of adrenaline hit me so hard it made me dizzy. My first instinct was to respond, to demand who they were or what they wanted, but something deeper told me not to. If they knew my name, they already knew enough. I stayed silent. Outside, I heard movement again, not toward the door this time, but along the side of the cottage. Slow footsteps dragging through gravel, brushing past the walls. They were circling. The sound moved past the bathroom wall, then toward the back. I tracked it without moving, every nerve in my body focused on the noise. It wasn't random pacing. They were checking every side, every possible way in. My confidence, whatever little I had left, was gone. Hearing my name had changed everything. This wasn't someone stumbling across the cottage by accident. They came here for me. I don't know how long it lasted. 20 minutes, maybe an hour. Time had completely lost meaning. The footsteps would fade, then come back, sometimes close, sometimes further out. At one point, I heard something brush against the window. Not a knock, not quite, just contact, like someone leaning in, listening. I stayed crouched the entire time, muscles burning, legs starting to shake from the strain. I didn't dare move, didn't dare breathe too loudly. At some point, the sound stopped again, this time for longer. I waited and waited. Then, faintly, from somewhere beyond the brush, I heard it. An engine. Low at first, then building. I recognized it instantly, a small outboard motor. I shifted slightly, just enough to listen more clearly. The sound grew louder for a few seconds, then began to drift away, fading into the distance across open water. They were leaving. I didn't believe it at first. It felt like a trick, like if I moved too soon, they'd be right outside again. So I stayed where I was. Minutes passed. Nothing. No footsteps, no movement, no sound except for the wind and the ocean. Eventually, I forced myself to stand. My legs nearly gave out from being crouched so long. I steadied myself against the wall and listened one last time. Still, nothing. I didn't sleep after that, not even close. I sat in the corner of the cottage with my back against the wall, staring at the door until the first hint of daylight started to bleed through the thin curtain. The moment it was bright enough to see clearly, I moved. I unlocked the deadbolt first, then the chain. I hesitated for just a second before opening the door. The cold morning air hit me immediately. Everything outside looked normal, too normal. But then I looked down. The gravel told the real story. Footprints. Deep, heavy boot prints pressed into the ground all around the cottage, not just near the door, everywhere. They circled the entire building multiple times. I followed them with my eyes, my stomach tightening as I did. They led away from the cottage in a straight line, toward the small dock. I didn't need to walk over there to know what I'd find. Still, I did. Each step felt heavier than the last. When I reached the edge of the inlet, I saw it clearly. The same small motorboat I had noticed the night before. Gone. The water was calm, undisturbed, like it had never been there. The footprints stopped right at the edge of the shoreline. No return tracks. Whoever came here arrived by boat and left the same way. I went back to the cottage, grabbed my bag, and left without looking back. The rest of the day felt like a blur. I returned the key to the property owner, boarded the ferry, and sat in silence the entire ride back to the mainland. I didn't talk to anyone, didn't look at anyone. I just kept replaying it in my head. I know you're in there, Ryan. A few days later, I confronted the coworker who told me about the island. I didn't accuse him directly, but I asked if he had mentioned my trip to anyone else. Anyone at all. He swore he hadn't, and the look on his face told me he was telling the truth. When I explained what happened, he looked genuinely shaken, not confused, not skeptical, scared. That stuck with me, because if he didn't tell anyone, then how did someone know? How did they know where I was staying, which cottage, which night? I've thought about it more times than I can count. There are only a few possibilities, and none of them sit well. Either someone had been watching me long before I ever booked that trip, or someone had access to information they shouldn't have had. And then there's the part I try not to think about too much, the part about my past. Like I said before, I've made mistakes. I've been involved in things I shouldn't have been, enough that I know there are people out there who wouldn't exactly wish me well. At the time, I thought I had left all of that behind. Now I'm not so sure, because whoever showed up on that island didn't stumble across me by chance. They came prepared. They came directly to that cottage, and they knew my name. It's been a year since that night. I still live in the same place, still work the same job. On the surface, nothing has changed, but every now and then I catch myself thinking about it again, about how easily someone found me once, and how, if they wanted to, they probably could again. This happened about 8 years ago, when I was finishing my master's degree in civil engineering. My focus was on structural decay, specifically how reinforced concrete breaks down in harsh coastal environments. It wasn't exactly exciting work, but it opened doors I never expected. One of those doors led me halfway across the world. I had been corresponding with a professor in Japan named Dr. Kenji Sato, who specialized in post-industrial deterioration. After months of exchanging emails about research, he invited me to attend a conference in Nagasaki. Toward the end of our conversations, he mentioned something that immediately caught my attention. He could arrange access to a place that very few people ever got to properly explore, an abandoned island called Kuroshima. If you've ever seen photos of those eerie, crumbling concrete cities swallowed by the ocean, you'll understand why I said yes immediately. Kuroshima was once a densely populated mining hub, packed with apartment blocks stacked on top of each other like a fortress. When the mine shut down decades ago, everyone left almost overnight. What remained was a decaying skeleton of a city. Most people could only visit on guided tours, restricted to a narrow path along the seawall. Entering the buildings themselves was strictly forbidden due to safety concerns. But my situation was different. Through Dr. Sato, I was granted limited research access to certain areas beyond the public zones. I had to sign a stack of documents beforehand, basically acknowledging that if I got hurt, it was my responsibility. At the time, that didn't bother me. I was too excited. The morning of the visit, I took a small boat arranged through the research office. It wasn't a tourist ferry, just a quiet vessel carrying me and a single escort. His name was Takeshi. He didn't say much during the ride, not unfriendly, just quiet. He spent most of the trip staring out at the water while I tried to contain my excitement. As we approached the island, I understood why people described it the way they did. From a distance, it looked small, almost insignificant. But the closer we got, the more it grew. Concrete walls rose out of the ocean like something artificial and unnatural. Buildings stacked tightly together, their edges crumbling, windows hollow and empty. It didn't feel abandoned. It felt paused, like something had interrupted life there and it never resumed. When we docked, Takeshi gave me a brief rundown of the rules. Stay on designated paths. Do not enter any area marked with red tape. Do not remove anything. Do not touch anything unless necessary. And most importantly, stay within visual range of him at all times. He repeated that last part twice. I agreed to everything without hesitation. At first, the experience was incredible. We moved through the outer structures and I took photos, notes, anything I could. The buildings were deteriorating exactly the way I'd studied. Exposed rebar, cracked surfaces, chunks of concrete missing entirely. It was like walking through a real-life case study. Takeshi followed a few steps behind me, occasionally checking his watch. He didn't seem nearly as interested as I was. If anything, he looked like he just wanted the day to be over with. Around midday, we entered one of the larger residential blocks. The staircase was intact, but barely. You could see straight through parts of the landing where the concrete had eroded completely. Every step felt like it might give out beneath me. Strangely, Takeshi stopped at the base of the stairs. He said, "I'll wait here." That caught me off guard. I reminded him of what he said earlier about staying within visual range. He didn't respond, just gestured for me to go ahead. I hesitated for a moment, but curiosity won out. I climbed. The higher I went, the quieter it became. The wind that had been moving through the lower levels faded, replaced by a heavy, stagnant stillness. On the fourth floor, I stepped into a long hallway lined with open doorways. Dust covered everything, thick, undisturbed layers of it. Or at least, most of it. That's when I noticed something strange. There was a path. Not perfectly clean, but noticeably disturbed compared to everything else, like something had been moving through that hallway repeatedly. Not recently, but not long enough for the dust to fully settle back. I crouched down and ran my fingers just above the surface without touching it. The pattern was clear. A route, leading to a room at the far end of the corridor. I should have gone back downstairs, told Takeshi, but I didn't. I told myself it was probably nothing, maybe wind currents or animals, even though that didn't really make sense. Curiosity pushed me forward. I walked slowly down the hallway, my footsteps echoing softly. When I reached the door, I paused. Something about it felt off. The air was different, heavier. I pushed the door open. Immediately, two things hit me. The first was the smell. It wasn't rotten, not exactly, but it was wrong. Artificial in a way I couldn't describe, like something chemical mixed with something organic. The second thing was the temperature. The wall just inside the room felt warm. Not hot, but noticeably warmer than everything else I'd touched that day. That didn't make sense. There was no sunlight reaching that part of the building, no heat source, nothing that could explain it. I stood there for a few seconds, trying to rationalize it. Then I backed out of the room. Something about it made my skin crawl. I went back downstairs and told Takeshi what I found. His reaction was immediate and unsettling. "That's not possible," he said flatly. "No one lives here." He didn't ask questions, didn't ask me to show him, didn't even seem curious, just dismissed it entirely. When I insisted that he come take a look, he shook his head. No need. The way he said it made it clear the conversation was over. We continued through other parts of the island, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The more I looked, the more I started noticing small details, marks on walls that didn't look like natural decay, objects slightly out of place. Nothing obvious, nothing you could point to and say someone was here, but enough to make you question it. At one point, I mentioned it again. This time, Takeshi didn't even respond. He just pulled out a radio and spoke quickly into it in Japanese. I asked who he was talking to. He said, "Schedule check." I didn't believe him, not for a second. By the time we reached the next building, I was no longer excited. I was uneasy. And that feeling only got worse when we entered a taller structure near the center of the island. Because for the first time since we arrived, Takeshi hesitated. Takeshi stopping at the entrance didn't make sense. Up until that point, he had been impatient, distant, almost bored with the entire trip. But now, standing in front of that building, he looked different, alert. He paused for a few seconds, scanning the doorway like he was listening for something. Then, without saying a word, he stepped inside behind me. That alone was enough to unsettle me. The interior was darker than the other buildings we had entered. The windows were either blocked or positioned in a way that let in very little light. My flashlight cut through the darkness in a narrow beam, illuminating cracked walls and debris-covered floors. We found the stairwell and began climbing. This time, Takeshi stayed close, too close. I could hear his boots right behind mine with every step. It felt like he didn't want any distance between us anymore. We reached the 5th floor and stepped into a corner hallway. I moved slowly, scanning the structure, trying to focus on my work, but that uneasy feeling from earlier had grown into something heavier. Something was wrong here. I didn't know what it was, but I could feel it. I stepped into one of the corner rooms and immediately froze. Against the far wall was a small pile of blankets, not scattered debris, not old fabric from the building, actual blankets, folded, layered. Next to them were several empty plastic water bottles, not decades old, modern. There was no way to explain it. Someone had been living there recently. My heart started pounding as I stepped closer, my mind racing to make sense of what I was seeing. This wasn't a theory anymore. This was proof. I turned to call Takeshi over, but the hallway behind me was empty. He was gone. For a second, I thought he'd just stepped back or moved to another room. "Takeshi," I called out. No response. The silence that followed felt suffocating. That's when the fear really hit. Not when I saw the blankets, not when I realized someone might be on the island, but when I realized I was alone, completely alone. My chest tightened and a wave of panic rushed through me so fast it made me dizzy. The building suddenly felt smaller, the air heavier. I stepped back into the hallway. "Takeshi," I shouted louder this time. Nothing. No footsteps, no voice. Nothing but the faint echo of my own words. I didn't think anymore. I just moved. I headed back toward the stairwell as quickly as I could without running. I didn't want to make noise, didn't want to draw attention to myself. But when I turned the corner, I stopped. The stairwell was blocked. A pile of rubble covered the landing. Concrete chunks, broken railings, debris, enough to completely seal off the way down. My stomach dropped. That hadn't been there before. I was sure of it. There hadn't been any collapse when we came up, which meant one of two things. Either it had just fallen or someone had put it there. I didn't stay to figure out which. I turned and ran. All thoughts of staying quiet disappeared. My boots slammed against the floor as I sprinted down the hallway, my breathing loud and uneven. I didn't know where I was going. I just needed another way out. Then I heard it. Footsteps behind me. At first, I thought it was Takeshi. Relief hit me for a split second, but that feeling vanished almost immediately because there was more than one set. 2, maybe 3, moving quickly, keeping pace. I didn't look back. I couldn't. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to keep moving. The hallway twisted and branched, turning into a maze. Every door I passed looked the same. Every corner led to another stretch of darkness. I had no idea if I was heading toward an exit or deeper into the building. The footsteps got closer. I could hear them clearly now. Heavy, fast, intentional. They weren't wandering. They were following me. I reached another stairwell and didn't even hesitate. I practically jumped down the steps, gripping the railing as I moved as fast as I could without falling. I don't remember how many floors I passed. Everything blurred together. At some point, I saw light. Daylight. I burst out of the building and ran across the open ground toward the dock. I didn't stop until I reached the boat. Takeshi was standing there, exactly where we had left him. Calm, still, like nothing had happened. The sight of him flipped something in me. Fear turned into anger so quickly it made me dizzy. The sight of him flipped something in me. Fear turned into anger so quickly it made me dizzy. "What in the hell is wrong with you?" I shouted, my voice shaking. I told him everything, the blankets, the blocked stairwell, the footsteps, the people in that building. I accused him of leaving me up there on purpose, of knowing something he wasn't telling me. He didn't react, not once. He just stood there watching me like I was overreacting to nothing. That made it worse. At one point, I actually wanted something to happen again, for someone to step out from one of the buildings so he would finally acknowledge it. But nothing did. When I finally ran out of things to say, he spoke. "We're leaving." That was it. No explanation, no questions, nothing. I didn't argue. I just got on the boat. The ride back felt longer than the trip out. I sat there in silence, my mind replaying everything that just happened. The footprints in the dust, the warm wall, the smell, the blankets, the footsteps behind me, and Takeshi disappearing when I needed him most. When we reached the mainland, I didn't wait around. I left as quickly as I could. The first thing I did was try to contact Dr. Sato. He's the one who arranged the trip, the only person who could explain any of this. But I couldn't reach him. My calls went unanswered, my emails bounced back. It was like he had vanished. I tried for weeks. Nothing. Eventually, I reported what I saw through the proper channels. I told them there were people living on that island, that something wasn't right. But nothing came of it. No follow-up, no investigation, nothing. It's been years since that trip. I've told this story more times than I can count, and people always try to explain it away. Squatters, homeless people, illegal activity. All of that makes sense, but there are parts that don't. Why did Takeshi refuse to check the room? Why did he leave me alone after insisting I stay within sight? And why did he not react to anything I said? And why did the stairwell suddenly become blocked after we used it? I don't know what was on that island. I just know I wasn't supposed to see it. And whatever was there was definitely aware of me. This happened a little over 10 years ago, during the final semester of my college years. I was studying history, and like most seniors, I was buried under the pressure of finishing my thesis on time. My focus was on abandoned institutional sites, places like old hospitals, quarantine zones, and rehabilitation centers that had been left behind and slowly reclaimed by nature. One location in particular had completely taken over my research, an island called Blackwell Island. It sat quietly in the middle of a river just outside a major city, technically still part of the city but completely off limits to the public. Decades earlier, it had housed a quarantine hospital, later a rehab center, and eventually it was shut down and abandoned. Since then, it had been left alone. No visitors, no maintenance, nothing. Nature had taken over. Trees pushed through buildings, vines wrapped around rusted structures, entire sections had collapsed into themselves. It was like a frozen moment in time, slowly being erased. I had no intention of actually going there. At least, that's what I told myself. But one night, while hanging out with two of my friends, Ethan and Marcus, I mentioned the island while we were drinking. I didn't expect much of a reaction. They weren't history majors, and I figured they'd zone out halfway through my explanation. Instead, they got hooked. The moment they realized this place was sitting right there in the same city we were in, their interest shifted from curiosity to excitement. Both of them were into that whole urban exploration scene, sneaking into abandoned buildings, documenting it, chasing that adrenaline rush. To them, this wasn't a research topic, it was an opportunity. At first, I pushed back. I told them it was illegal, that access was restricted for a reason. But the more we talked about it, the more the idea started to take hold. After months of researching the place, reading about it, studying maps, a part of me wanted to see it for myself. Eventually, logic lost. Curiosity won. A few weeks later, we had a plan. We would launch from a quiet park along the river sometime after 2 a.m., paddle across in kayaks, explore the island for a couple of hours, and leave before sunrise. Simple. Or at least it sounded simple. That night, everything felt surreal. We met at the park just after 2 a.m., dragging 3 single-person kayaks down toward the water. The place was completely empty. No cars, no people, just the distant hum of the city far behind us. Getting the kayaks into the water was easier than expected, and once we pushed off, there was no turning back. The island sat ahead of us, dark and silent. The closer we got, the more real it felt. This wasn't just a story anymore. We were actually doing it. When we reached the shoreline, pulling the kayaks onto land was harder than expected. The area was overgrown with tall reeds and thick vegetation, making it difficult to find stable ground. Eventually, we managed to drag them far enough in and stepped on solid land. For a moment, none of us spoke. We just stood there, taking it in. It was quiet. Not normal quiet. The kind of silence that feels heavy. We were still technically in the city. Civilization was right there, less than a mile away, but it didn't feel like it. It felt like we had stepped somewhere completely separate. We turned on our flashlights and started moving inland. It didn't take long for Ethan and Marcus to realize how big the island actually was. I had tried to explain it before, even showed them maps, but seeing it in person was different. Buildings were everywhere, some barely standing, others completely overtaken by nature. At one point, Marcus stopped in front of a structure that had a tree growing straight through the middle of it, splitting it apart. He laughed nervously and said it looked like something out of a post-apocalyptic game. He wasn't wrong. That's exactly what it felt like. We explored a few of the more intact buildings first. Most of them were empty, filled with debris and signs of decay. But in one of the larger structures, Ethan found something on the ground near a doorway. A spray paint can, half full. That alone didn't seem like much at first. There was already graffiti on the walls, some of it recent. It wasn't impossible that other people had made their way onto the island before us. But something about it didn't sit right with me. It wasn't old. It hadn't been there long. Ethan wanted to use it. Marcus immediately agreed. I told them not to. It felt wrong. Not just because of the history of the place, but because something about the island didn't feel abandoned in the way I expected. They argued that a little more graffiti wouldn't make a difference. I didn't feel like fighting about it, so I told them I wasn't going to stick around and watch. And that's when I made my first mistake. I walked away. At first, it didn't feel like a big deal. The building had multiple hallways and rooms. I figured I'd just explore a different section and meet back up with them in a few minutes. But the further I got, the atmosphere changed. Being with other people had created a kind of buffer, a sense of safety. Alone, that feeling disappeared. Every sound felt amplified. Every shadow looked deeper. I moved through a long hallway, shining my flashlight into different rooms, trying to stay focused on why I was there in the first place. That's when I heard it. My name. Called from somewhere ahead. Daniel. It was Marcus's voice. Clear. Familiar, but something about it felt off. I stopped walking. For Marcus to be ahead of me, he would have had to leave Ethan almost immediately after I walked away and somehow loop around through the building. That didn't make sense. Still, I answered, "Where are you?" A second later, I got a response. "In here." This time, it sounded closer, from a room just a few doors down on my left. I hesitated. Something about the tone wasn't right, but I convinced myself I was overthinking it. I walked toward the doorway. It was darker than the hallway. My flashlight barely reached inside. I stepped in and swept the light across the room. That's when I saw it. A figure, standing in the far corner, facing the wall. For a split second, my brain tried to rationalize it, tried to tell me it was one of my friends, but it wasn't. It couldn't be. Whoever or whatever was standing there was too tall, easily over 6.5 feet. Neither Marcus nor Ethan were anywhere close to that height. A cold wave of fear hit me so hard, it felt like I couldn't breathe. I didn't think. I didn't question it. I just screamed and ran. I don't remember turning around. I don't remember making the decision to run. One second, I was standing in that doorway, staring at something that shouldn't have been there. And the next, I was sprinting down the hallway like my life depended on it. My footsteps echoed violently off the walls as I ran, my flashlight shaking in my hand, the beam bouncing wildly across doors and broken walls. Every shadow felt like it was reaching for me. Every dark opening looked like something else might step out at any second. I started yelling their names. "Marcus! Ethan! Run!" My voice sounded strained, almost unrecognizable, like it didn't even belong to me. Panic had completely taken over. I didn't look back. I couldn't. Something deep inside me told me that if I turned around, I would see it following me. Or worse, closer than it should be. The hallway seemed longer than it had been before, twisting, stretching, refusing to end. My lungs burned, my chest tight from the sudden burst of adrenaline. Then I saw them. Marcus and Ethan. They were near the section where we had split up, both of them turning toward me as I came running full speed in their direction. I must have looked insane. They didn't even ask what was wrong. They just started running too. We didn't stop to explain anything. No questions, no hesitation. Whatever expression was on my face must have told them everything they needed to know. We ran out of the building, back into the open air. But even outside, the feeling didn't go away. If anything, it got worse. The island suddenly felt too big, too open, too exposed, like there was nowhere to hide. We didn't slow down. We cut straight through the overgrowth, pushing past branches and tall weeds, heading back toward the shoreline where we left the kayaks. Only when we reached them did we finally stop. All three of us were breathing heavily, trying to catch our breath. Marcus looked at me first. "What happened?" he asked. I tried to speak, but the words got stuck in my throat at first. My heart was still racing too fast, my thoughts too scattered. "There's someone here," I finally said. They exchanged a quick look. I told them everything. The voice, how it sounded exactly like Marcus. The room, the figure in the corner, the height, the way it was just standing there, facing the wall. At first, they didn't believe me. I could see it in their faces, confusion mixed with doubt. And honestly, I didn't blame them. If the situation were reversed, I probably would have thought the same thing. But I kept insisting. I told them I wasn't joking, that I wasn't trying to scare them. Something was in that building, and it wasn't one of us. Slowly, their expressions started to change. The doubt faded, replaced with something else. Fear. Real fear. Marcus shook his head. "That's not possible," he muttered. Ethan didn't say anything, but I could tell he was shaken. We all were. There was only one decision left to make. We were leaving, Right then, no debate. Whatever we came there to see, it wasn't worth staying another second. We grabbed the kayaks and started dragging them back toward the water. The reeds and mud made it harder than before, our hands shaking, our movements rushed and uncoordinated. And then, we heard it. All three of us froze at the exact same time. It came from somewhere behind us, faint but clear. A sound, low, broken, like someone trying to breathe through pain. It sounded like a woman, older, weak, a soft, drawn-out moan. Not loud, but unmistakable. We didn't move, didn't speak. The sound came again, slightly clearer this time, somewhere deeper in the island, behind us. It wasn't close, but it wasn't far either. And whatever it was, it didn't sound natural. I slowly turned my head just enough to look at Marcus and Ethan. Both of them had the same expression I probably did. Wide eyes, completely frozen. No one said it out loud, but we were all thinking the same thing. We needed to get out, now. We didn't wait for the sound to come again. We shoved the kayaks into the water as fast as we could and climbed in, nearly tipping them in the process. The second we pushed off, I started paddling harder than I ever had in my life. None of us looked back. Not once. The water felt endless. Every second stretched out, every splash of the paddle too loud in the silence. I kept expecting to hear something behind us. Movement, voices, anything. But there was nothing. Just the sound of water and our breathing. Eventually, the shoreline we had launched from came back into view, and for the first time since all of this started, I felt something close to relief. We reached the park, pulled the kayaks onto shore, and just stood there for a moment, trying to process everything. No one spoke at first. Then, all at once, we started talking over each other, replaying everything, trying to make sense of it. Marcus kept going back to the voice. "You're sure it sounded like me?" he asked. "I'm telling you, it was your voice. Exactly his voice. Not similar, not close, identical." That's the part that stuck with me the most, because Marcus never left Ethan's side after I walked away. They both confirmed it, which meant whatever called out to me knew what his voice sounded like. The rest of the night was a blur. None of us slept. We just kept talking, trying to come up with explanations. A person on the island? Maybe. Someone messing with us? Possible. But none of it explained everything. The height of the figure, the way it stood there without moving, the voice, that sound we heard at the end. None of it added up. It's been over 10 years since that night. I've never gone back. And as far as I know, access to that island is even more restricted now. Part of me has thought about trying again, going back during the day, seeing if I can find that building, that room. But every time I seriously consider it, I remember how I felt in that moment, standing in that doorway, looking at something that didn't belong, and hearing a voice that shouldn't have been possible. I've spent years trying to explain it, trying to find a logical answer. But the truth is, I don't think there is one. Because whatever was on that island that night, it wasn't just there. It was aware of us. It called me by name. It used a voice it shouldn't have had. And I have no doubt, if I had stayed in that room any longer, it would have turned around.